A shockwave just hit Westminster. King Charles has broken his silence with an explosive warning aimed directly at Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. This isn't the usual royal diplomacy or vague commentary. No, this is a blunt, urgent message about the very future of Britain's independence. As Starmer quietly plots what many see as a Brexit betrayal, the monarch is sounding alarms that cannot be ignored. The clock is ticking, and the 19th of May is fast approaching, a date that could mark the undoing of everything Brexit promised. What's really happening behind the closed doors of power? And why is the king so alarmed? The answers are more shocking than you think. King Charles has rarely stepped into the political arena publicly, especially when it comes to such a divisive issue as Brexit. But his recent words have sent a clear, chilling warning to Keir Starmer and Labour. A warning not just about policy, but about the very soul of the United Kingdom. For years, the Brexit debate has divided the nation. It promised sovereignty, control and freedom from Brussels. Yet now, whispers from Buckingham Palace suggest that the king sees something deeply wrong with Starmer's approach. A quiet, almost hidden plan to pull Britain back under Brussels' influence. Behind the usual pomp and ceremony, this is no ordinary royal statement. It reflects serious concern about the speed and secrecy of Labour's moves toward what can only be described as a Brexit U-turn. Starmer's team is said to be preparing for a series of deals that will align UK regulations closely with the EU, surrender legal oversight to the European Court of Justice, and even pour British tax money into EU military projects. These are not small policy tweaks. They are fundamental reversals that betray the referendum result and risk undermining the UK's hard-won independence. The King's warning cuts through the political noise and demands attention because it highlights the constitutional crisis brewing beneath the surface. It's no secret that Charles has long favoured unity and cooperation across Europe, but this time, the stakes are different. This is about the survival of the nation itself. Sources close to the palace reveal that the monarch is deeply uneasy, not only because of what Starmer plans, but how quickly it's unfolding without public debate. The King's unease has grown into something far more urgent, and his message to the Prime Minister-in-waiting is clear: reconsider or risk fracturing the country. Starmer's supporters argue that this is about pragmatism, a recognition that the UK needs to maintain close ties with its largest trading partner. But many see it as a betrayal of the Brexit mandate, a stealthy move to undo what millions voted for in 2016. The question is whether the British people will stand for it. Recent local elections suggest the answer is no. Labour has lost ground. To Reform UK, a party determined to protect Brexit in full and push back against any attempt to rejoin the EU's orbit. Behind the scenes, Brussels is watching eagerly. French officials have already started pressing for renewed fishing rights, while EU negotiators see an opportunity to draw Britain back into their regulatory web. For Brussels, this is a golden moment, a chance to reclaim influence, markets and control that Brexit sought to sever. The King's warning is not just about Starmer's intentions, it's a call to the nation to recognise the threat of a quiet surrender. As the 19th of May summit approaches, the atmosphere in Westminster is tense. Starmer's Labour may be confident in their political calculations, but the King's intervention signals a deeper unease that even his usually reserved role cannot contain. This is not just political posturing, it is a constitutional crisis in the making. The future of Brexit, and perhaps the United Kingdom itself, hangs in the balance. Keir Starmer's ascent to Labour leadership was marked by promises to unite the party and restore trust with voters disillusioned by years of political turmoil. Yet beneath the polished speeches and carefully crafted media appearances, a more troubling narrative is emerging, one of a quiet, calculated shift that risks undoing the monumental decision taken by the British people in 2016. Starmer's approach to Brexit, which once seemed pragmatic and moderate, is now being exposed as a deliberate attempt to realign the United Kingdom with the European Union's rules and regulations, effectively reversing the referendum result without any public mandate. This quiet U-turn has been met with growing suspicion and alarm across the country. Political insiders reveal that behind closed doors, Starmer's team is preparing to accept alignment with EU food standards, a move that would hand Brussels significant control over British agriculture and food safety policies. Such alignment means the UK would lose the freedom to set its own regulations and be forced to comply with rules determined thousands of miles away. For a nation that voted to take back control, this is a betrayal of the highest order. It signals not just a political compromise, but a surrender of sovereignty that goes against the very essence of Brexit. Adding fuel to the fire is the reported willingness of Labour to invite the European Court of Justice, ECJ, back onto British soil. The ECJ was the symbol of overreach and loss of control that fueled much of the Leave campaign's rhetoric. To now allow it to arbitrate disputes within the UK sends a stark message that the government is willing to cede judicial authority to a foreign institution. This move is being framed as a practical necessity for smooth trade relations, but critics argue it is a fundamental undermining of the UK's legal independence. It is, in essence, a quiet re-entry into the EU's judicial framework under a different name. This creeping rapprochement extends beyond legal and regulatory concerns. Starmer is reportedly preparing to commit British taxpayer money to Brussels' military ambitions, a deeply controversial step that could entangle the UK in EU defence projects without clear benefit or control. For a country proud of its independent military tradition, this looks like yet another surrender of sovereignty to a supranational entity. Many wonder how this aligns with Labour's promises of putting Britain first, especially as these moves happen without transparent public debate or parliamentary scrutiny. Perhaps most controversial of all is the resurrection of the youth mobility scheme once discarded as unworkable. Now, under a new guise of temporary migration or youth exchange programmes, this initiative is quietly making its way back into government plans. While dressed up as a beneficial cultural and educational exchange, critics warn it's a thinly veiled attempt to reopen Britain's borders to large-scale migration from Europe. Labour's hope is that the public, fatigued by political upheaval and economic uncertainty, will overlook this significant policy shift. However, the reality is stark. This policy threatens to reverse the stricter immigration controls promised by Brexit, fueling fears of an open border Britain once again. This sequence of events has not gone unnoticed. Across the political spectrum, voices are growing louder in opposition. The Conservative Party, already reeling from internal divisions, is capitalising on Labour's vulnerability by spotlighting these alleged betrayals. Reform UK, riding a wave of populist discontent, has seized on the issue as its defining cause, positioning itself as the true defender of the Brexit mandate. Their recent electoral successes in local elections reflect a growing public backlash against any perceived softening on Brexit, demonstrating that the electorate is far from ready to embrace Starmer's covert shift. Behind the scenes, the EU watches closely. France, in particular, has been vocal about reclaiming fishing rights that were lost as part of the Brexit negotiations. French negotiators are pressing hard, seeing Labour's moves as a window of opportunity to regain access to British waters, a critical economic and symbolic resource. Brussels' broader strategy appears clear: reintegrate the UK economically and politically, dismantling the barriers erected by Brexit and restoring the continent-wide influence the EU once held. To Brussels, Starmer's overtures signal a welcome opening to reassert control. This convergence of political betrayal, public frustration, and external pressure creates a volatile mix. Starmer's Labour may believe it is acting in the national interest, but the optics suggest a party increasingly disconnected from the will of the people. The King's warning underscores the gravity of this moment. It is not merely a political disagreement. It is a constitutional crisis that questions the very future of British democracy and sovereignty. As the May 19th summit approaches, the stakes could not be higher. The decisions made behind closed doors will resonate for generations, shaping the nation's path and potentially unravelling the promises of Brexit. In this charged atmosphere, the British public finds itself at a crossroads. Will they accept a gradual surrender of the freedoms and controls won after years of struggle? Or will they rise in opposition, demanding accountability and respect for the democratic mandate they delivered nearly a decade ago? The political. Establishment may be pushing forward with quiet compromises, but the wider population is becoming more vocal, more energised, and less willing to be sidelined. This dynamic promises a dramatic showdown in the weeks and months to come, with consequences that will extend far beyond party politics. King Charles's intervention acts as a stark reminder that this is no ordinary political debate. It touches the foundations of the nation's identity, sovereignty, and future. For many, the King's voice represents the last beacon warning against a path that risks turning back the clock on Brexit and handing over control to Brussels once again. As Westminster braces for what lies ahead, the question remains: can the United Kingdom chart a course that honours its democratic choices and secures its independence? Or will Starmer's Labour usher in a new era of compromise that leaves Brexit and the nation itself forever changed? The Anti-Brexit Movement, long simmering under the surface since the 2016 referendum, is now showing signs of a powerful resurgence. This renewed energy stems from widespread frustration, with political leaders who appear to be ignoring or undermining the clear mandate delivered by millions of voters. The movement is no longer confined to fringe groups or isolated protests. It has evolved into a broad coalition of voices that spans the political spectrum, tapping into deep anxieties about national sovereignty, economic independence, and the future direction of the United Kingdom. Starmer's perceived betrayal has become a rallying point for this growing opposition. Many feel that Labour's leadership is no longer a champion of working-class interests or British values, but instead represents a political elite eager to reverse Brexit under the guise of pragmatism. This disillusionment has pushed some former Labour supporters toward alternative parties that promise to defend Brexit's legacy with unwavering commitment. Reform UK and the Conservatives have both capitalised on this shift, positioning themselves as the true defenders of the referendum result and appealing to voters tired of political doublespeak and broken promises. The anti-Brexit movement is also mobilising at the grassroots level in a way not seen for years. Local campaigns, community meetings and social media activism are amplifying calls for politicians to respect the will of the people and resist any attempts to rejoin or realign with the European Union. Public demonstrations have grown in size and frequency, with chants and banners demanding full Brexit implementation and national sovereignty. These protests are no longer seen as isolated incidents, but as expressions of widespread public anger and determination. Key to this resurgence is the role of media and alternative news outlets that provide platforms for voices often ignored by mainstream sources. These outlets are exposing the details of Starmer's proposed alignments with EU regulations and the consequences of such policies. Investigative reports highlight the risks to British agriculture, fishing rights, and judicial independence, offering evidence that fuels the movement's claims of a hidden agenda. The exposure of these issues has heightened public awareness and intensified pressure on elected officials to take a clear stand. Economic concerns are also driving the anti-Brexit sentiment. Many citizens worry that continued alignment with EU rules will stifle British innovation, limit trade opportunities outside Europe, and harm domestic industries. Farmers, fishermen, and manufacturers have voiced alarm over regulations that could impose costly standards and restrictions, jeopardizing livelihoods and jobs. This economic uncertainty feeds into a broader narrative of lost potential and control, reinforcing calls for a truly independent Britain. International observers watch closely as the UK grapples with these internal divisions. The European Union views the political turbulence as an opportunity to regain influence, while countries like the United States and Commonwealth nations weigh the implications for trade and diplomatic relations. The UK's global standing is at stake, and the choices made in this moment will define its role on the world stage for decades. In response to the mounting pressure, Starmer and Labour face a delicate balancing act. They must navigate between appeasing the EU and addressing domestic unrest. However, their current strategy of quiet concessions risks alienating core supporters and empowering opposition parties. The possibility of defections from Labour ranks grows as MPs and activists question the leadership's direction and commitment to Brexit principles. This internal turmoil threatens to weaken the party's position in Parliament and in the public. The King's recent warning adds another layer of complexity to the political landscape. As a symbolic guardian of the nation's unity and constitutional order, the monarch's intervention underscores the seriousness of the crisis. It sends a message that the country's sovereignty and democratic choices must be respected above partisan politics. This rare public caution is reverberating through Westminster and beyond, signalling that the status quo is no longer tenable. Looking ahead, the anti-Brexit movement's momentum suggests that any attempts to dilute or reverse Brexit will face fierce resistance. The coming weeks will likely see intensified political battles, public demonstrations, and media scrutiny as the nation wrestles with its identity and future. The outcome of this struggle will shape not only the next election, but the very fabric of the United Kingdom's democracy and sovereignty. The question remains whether Starmer's Labour can reconcile its ambitions with the public's expectations, or if it will be swept aside by a rising tide of discontent. For many Britons, Brexit was about reclaiming control and charting an independent course. Any deviation from this path risks igniting a backlash that could redefine British politics for generations to come. The moment to stand up for Britain's sovereignty has never been more critical. As King Charles's unprecedented warning reverberates through Westminster, every citizen must pay close attention to the forces at work behind the scenes. The quiet dismantling of Brexit's hard-won gains isn't happening in broad daylight. It's being orchestrated with alarming secrecy and political convenience. This is no time for complacency or silence. The future of the United Kingdom, the very foundation of its democracy, and the promise made to millions in 2016 are on the line. It's a battle for the nation's soul, and each of us has a role to play. Your voice matters. The decisions made in the coming weeks and months will shape Britain's destiny for decades. It is essential to hold elected officials accountable and demand transparency about any deals with Brussels that threaten our independence. Don't allow political elites to rewrite history or ignore the referendum mandate without public scrutiny. Contact your MP, attend local meetings, and make your stance known loud and clear. Democracy thrives when citizens engage, push back against backroom deals, and refuse to accept betrayal. Support parties and movements that genuinely respect the Brexit vote. Reform UK and others have emerged as the steadfast defenders of the 2016 decision, fighting to preserve British sovereignty and protect national interests. By rallying behind these voices, you can amplify the call for full Brexit implementation and push back against any attempts to reverse or dilute the process. Your vote and your activism can make a difference in local elections, national debates, and beyond. Stay informed. The mainstream media may not always highlight the full picture, so seek out independent news sources that expose the facts and provide unfiltered analysis. Awareness is a powerful tool against misinformation and political spin. The more Britons understand the implications of ongoing negotiations, the stronger the collective resistance to policies that threaten the country's autonomy. Join public demonstrations and grassroots campaigns to show that the British people remain united in their demand for sovereignty. Protests and rallies send a powerful message to politicians. The public will not be ignored or silenced. These visible displays of determination bolster morale and keep the issue at the forefront of national discourse. Remember, this fight transcends party lines and political affiliations. It is about preserving the democratic will of the people and protecting the United Kingdom's future. King Charles's warning signals that the stakes have never been higher. We are at a crossroads where action, or inaction, will define the country's path forward. Now is the time to rise. Refuse to accept any quiet surrender of Britain's hard-won freedoms. Demand accountability, transparency, and respect for the referendum. Together, as a united and informed citizenry, we can ensure that Britain remains a sovereign nation, free to shape its destiny on its own terms. Do not wait for others to act. The future is in your hands, and the eyes of the world are watching. Stand firm, speak out, and defend the Britain you believe in. The battle is far from over, and every voice counts. This is your call to action. Answer it boldly.